The real controversy is not that Harry and Meghan became the butt of jokes. It is how quickly a story that once demanded royal-level seriousness became one of the biggest comedy targets in entertainment, and why, when the jokes became especially brutal, some of the material suddenly vanished. That is where this story gets interesting, because the laughter may have been only the surface. Underneath it was a growing pattern of comedians, television hosts, satirists, and audiences all circling the same question. How did Harry and Meghan go from commanding sympathy to becoming almost irresistible comedy material?
Harry, whose memoir just broke the Guinness record for fastest-selling nonfiction book of all time. They're now releasing a version for kids. I don't know if you know about this. It's a twist on The Princess and the Pea. It's called The Prince and the Penis.
The 60 Minutes interview was a great chance to hear Harry and Meghan's story, in case you missed their 2-hour sit-down with Oprah or their 6-part Netflix documentary.
You see the interview last night? Oprah returned with Meghan and Harry in what will surely go down in history as the most shocking gender reveal party of all time. At least 17 million Americans watch only the Super Bowl.
Harry says, how do you explain to someone who just started dating that they have to curtsy to your own grandmother?
How do you explain that you bow to your grandmother and that you will need to curtsy?
Maybe just tell her that your grandmother is the
Jimmy Kimmel just did what most people in Hollywood wouldn't dare touch. He went straight after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on national television. When Harry's memoir Spare exploded onto the scene and became the fastest-selling nonfiction book ever, according to Guinness World Records, Kimmel wasn't exactly lining up to celebrate. Instead, he turned Harry's massive achievement into comedy material. On Jimmy Kimmel Live, Kimmel unveiled a savage parody children's book called The Prince and the Penis, taking direct aim at some of the memoir's most bizarre and talked about revelations. Suddenly, Harry's deeply personal royal tale all wasn't just breaking records. It was getting roasted in front of millions. That was the first warning sign. The memoir was supposed to explain Harry's side of the story, but comedy had already found a completely different way to frame it. Jimmy Kimmel didn't treat the royal confession like sacred material. He treated it like ammunition. And then came an even more personal swipe, because the target was no longer merely the book. It was Harry himself.
Buckingham Palace today released a statement on behalf of the Queen that begins, "The whole family is saddened." Saddened is another word for bull. And to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. Oh, they just found out.
But Harry's memoir wasn't Kimmel's only target. He went straight for Harry himself. Kimmel even compared the prince's appearance to Screech, the famously awkward character from Saved by the Bell. At that point, there was nothing subtle about the shade being thrown. Harry wasn't simply part of the joke anymore. Harry was the joke. And with the studio audience laughing along, the whole moment showed just how easily a prince who once commanded serious royal attention could suddenly become late-night comedy material. And that distinction matters. A royal being mentioned in comedy is one thing. Becoming the joke is something else entirely. Because once audiences accept that image, every future controversy becomes easier to parody. Then Jimmy Kimmel went somewhere even more explosive, the allegations and controversies involving racism surrounding Harry and Meghan.
Hey, they should hope that the kid looks more like Meghan than Harry. No offense, but Harry kind of looks like the guy who played Screech, maybe.
But that roast was nothing compared with where Kimmel went next. He jumped straight into one of the most explosive parts of Harry and Meghan's story, their public claims and controversies involving racism. Kimmel zeroed in on what he presented as the irony of leaving Britain for America while trying to escape racial tensions. Instead of treating the subject like untouchable royal drama, he flipped the entire situation into a punchline. Suddenly, one of the most serious chapters in Harry and Meghan's public story had become late-night comedy, and Kimmel wasn't backing away from the controversy. The audience reaction made the moment even more explosive, because this wasn't some obscure internet joke hidden away from public view. It was mainstream television. The laughter itself became part of the story, almost like a verdict from the room. And when the audience erupted again, the contrast was impossible to miss. Subjects that Harry and Meghan had presented as deeply painful were now being recycled as entertainment.
Yeah, it's not. Meghan Markle said that when she joined the royal family, they took away her passport, driver's license, and keys. Welcome to the royal family. Please remove your belt and get ready for a cavity search. And her husband Harry made a number of startling accusations. The governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, vigorously denied all of them. Just had a reflex today.
The audience immediately exploded with laughter, and that's what made the moment land even harder. Kimmel wasn't tiptoeing around the controversy or trying to soften the joke. He went straight at a narrative Harry and Meghan had spent years putting at the center of their public story. And he did exploded with millions watching. Instead of treating the subject like something Hollywood was afraid to touch, Kimmel turned it into primetime comedy material, while the crowd's reaction made the whole roast feel even more brutal. Then came the bigger transformation. Harry and Meghan had wanted out of royal life, but once they explained their reasons publicly, their story stopped belonging exclusively to them. Every interview created another angle. Every allegation created another debate. Every emotional revelation created another opportunity for someone else to interpret, challenge, mock, or parody it. Harry and Meghan wanted out, but it was the way they told the story of that royal escape that changed everything. Once they stepped away from official duties, their interviews unleashed serious allegations about life behind palace walls, including explosive concerns involving race and how they believed they had been treated inside the institution. From there, the story became bigger than Harry and Meghan could control. The controversy spread everywhere, and comedians like Jimmy Kimmel started turning their most dramatic claims into late-night material. Suddenly, the Sussexes weren't just making headlines, they were becoming regular targets of mainstream satire, with their royal fallout transformed into punchlines for millions. And then it stopped looking like one comedian having one particularly savage night. It became a pattern. Show after show, host after host, the same names kept returning. That is when the real humiliation began, not because one joke landed, but because the jokes refused to stop. And pretty soon, this wasn't just one savage joke from one comedian. Show after show, host after host, and commentator after commentator kept coming back to Harry and Meghan, turning their latest drama into fresh material every single time. But then came the twist that changed the atmosphere completely. Comedy was one thing, legal complications were another. Suddenly, the jokes were no longer just jokes. A satirical portrayal connected to Spitting Image dragged the entire controversy into a much more serious arena. But then the whole story suddenly took a much more serious turn. Spitting Image had repeatedly put Harry and Meghan in the firing line with its savage satirical portrayals, turning the couple into recurring comedy targets. Then the laughter collided with legal drama. A dispute connected to the show's portrayal of Harry and Meghan dragged the controversy into a completely different arena. Suddenly, this wasn't just about puppets, punchlines, and getting a laugh anymore. The battle had moved beyond the comedy stage. And then came the detail that made everyone suspicious: material disappeared. Suddenly, the jokes that had been circulating were no longer as easy to find. That raised the question nobody could ignore: who pushed back and why? Because when satire disappears after becoming public, curiosity usually becomes louder than the original joke. And that is exactly where the story became even more uncomfortable. Simon Brodkin watched the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary expecting, at the very least, to understand their side. Instead, he claimed the experience pushed him in the opposite direction. The more the couple explained their pain, their family conflicts, their concerns about racism, misogyny, security, and life inside the royal institution, the more critics felt that the central message was being buried underneath personal drama. The serious subjects were there, but the endless focus on H&M, private grievances, and family tensions gave comedians another opening. Suddenly, every attempt to explain the Sussex story seemed capable of producing another punchline. Then, Kelly Osbourne entered the conversation and completely removed the gloves. The criticism shifted toward Harry's repeated complaints about his difficult life, with the argument that enormous privilege did not automatically make his struggles more important than everyone else's. The contradiction was brutal, complaining about unwanted attention while simultaneously publishing a memoir, appearing in documentaries, and remaining deeply involved in celebrity culture. Then came the Nazi costume controversy again, dragging Harry's most damaging old scandal back into the conversation and making the polished humanitarian image collide with the past. Saturday Night Live then took its turn, attacking Meghan's Hollywood history through jokes about suits and turning the show into a punchline about putting children to sleep. Stephen Colbert followed, targeting Meghan's apparent surprise at royal traditions and joking that perhaps some basic research would have helped before marrying into the monarchy. The Google joke made the criticism even sharper. Suddenly, the claim of not knowing enough about royal life had transformed into a comedy setup, with every unanswered question becoming another invitation for late-night television. Then came the wax figures. Madame Tussauds London separated Harry and Meghan's figures from the main royal display, turning the real-world royal split into something almost absurdly physical. Conan O'Brien seized on that bizarre development and created an uncomfortable museum skit around where the figures might end up. The joke became deliberately strange, pushing the Sussex satire into territory where the audience was laughing while simultaneously wondering how far the bit could possibly go. Trevor Noah then reached back to the moment when Harry reportedly approached a Disney executive at a movie premiere about a voiceover opportunity for Meghan. Suddenly, a British prince looked less like a royal representative and more like a Hollywood talent agent. The contrast was almost too perfect for comedy. Royal marriages once symbolized diplomacy, alliances, and dynastic power. Now the conversation was about Disney executives, voiceovers, Netflix projects, podcasts, sponsored posts, and business opportunities. The palace had been replaced by Hollywood. Family Guy sharpened that contrast even further, mocking the enormous sums associated with Netflix and the couple's post-royal commercial life. And the criticism became increasingly focused on whether the Sussex brand was producing enough value to justify the opportunities repeatedly offered to it. That question became especially uncomfortable when commentators argued that proximity to the British royal family had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. And then the story returned to the mysterious spitting image material. The missing clips suddenly mattered more. The earlier jokes had already created controversy, but now their disappearance gave the entire saga an air of secrecy. Godfrey pushed directly into the racism controversy, challenging the way Harry and Meghan's claims were discussed and arguing that some questions had been transformed into accusations. The debate became uglier, louder, and more personal. Critics then returned to the contradictions surrounding privacy. If Harry and Meghan wanted peace, why did publicity seem to follow almost every major appearance? Meghan's yoga visit became another example used by critics to question whether privacy and visibility could somehow coexist. Then, Spitting Image attacked Love Meghan, parodying the polished lifestyle content through exaggerated flowers, snacks, breathing exercises, and carefully staged goodness. The satire made everything look artificial, even when the original intention was to appear effortless. And finally, the disappearance of more Spitting Image episodes brought the entire mystery full circle. South Park remained untouched, while Harry and Meghan material from Spitting Image reportedly vanished, fueling speculation about what had happened behind the scenes. No definitive explanation could erase the strange timing. The jokes had become too controversial to ignore, yet their disappearance made them impossible to forget. And that may be the most damaging twist of all. When satire disappears, people stop asking whether the joke was funny and start asking why someone wanted it gone.